Hi, and welcome to the Seamless Blend, digital textile dialogues with Gabby and Jorgen. Our primary purpose is to educate and initiate discussions. The opinions expressed are solely our own and do not constitute professional advice or services. We invite contributions from our audience and maintain an open community on Discord. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to another live stream and episode of the Seamless Blend. We're back here. I think now it's been around 3 weeks since the last episode. We've talked a lot about digital materials in general, I think different software. And one of the things that we, both for us and I think for many people out there as well, you might be wondering just sometimes which tools to choose to get started, depending on what you're working on, like what kind of tools is going to be best for you. There might just be so many tools that it might be even just difficult to get started. So we thought we would just create this, have an episode this time focused mostly just around like how do we talk about choosing tools? What are some of the key tools out there? And we're going to be focusing specifically on fashion and apparel, and we want to leave kind of one big message that we hope also that everyone will essentially just the key to this is just getting started, and software will change over time. There's going to be changes to this. It's a relatively not necessarily just new space, but there's still a lot of changes to it. And you've been reading a book lately, Gabby, or you mentioned
Yes.
something you've been reading that also it sounds like it brought back some textile history.
Well, yeah, I think exactly. I think the reason why I was really interested in doing this episode with you is we've got to remember what we're trying to do. So we're trying to recreate representations of textiles. So I have a textile background. I'm a weaver by trade, and I still sort of love physical textiles. That's where like my heart lies. So I've been reading the book Worn by Sophie Tannhauser. It's absolutely amazing. And it really got me thinking about textile creation and the history and the historical significance of textiles. And actually, as I'm sat pretty much all day, every day, looking at pixels and trying to recognize if they are an accurate representation of physical textiles, whether they're woven or knitted, it made me reflect on where do textiles come from. So essentially, it all starts with string, with fibers that were then we would consider that yarn now, but at the time it was string. Then that string was knotted, and then those knots were knitted materials, or that string was interlaced, obviously, and then at right angles to become weaving. So it's just considering we're looking at pixels all day, every day, trying to look at these representation of textiles, but understanding that the sort of like the history that we have as human beings with textiles is so rooted and so deep. So I've been very inspired by the book. I totally recommend everyone goes and reads it. And it's definitely made me consider every day with the business, like, why are we doing this? And we're doing it. The reason why I'm doing this is trying to create the most accurate representation of a textiles in 3D that we can do right now with the software and the rendering power that is available to us. That's it, right? And we might use lots of different softwares to get to that point, or we might use 2 or 3, and that is exactly fine, and it's okay, and it's just what we need to do at that moment in time. So that's kind of like jumping us up for this episode, I would say.
Yeah. And even as you said that, I thought about almost something we've said before as well, which I think can be a bit difficult sometimes, on how there aren't necessarily just one software that can solve all your problems. So that's also something that we've tried to bring into this, is that there's not just one kind of solution for everything. So it's important to just, I think, get a little bit of an understanding and an overview over all these tools that are out there, and kind of like how to choose the right tools to combine in the process.
And I think we would love, like, as people working in fashion in the supply chain, to be given something that's plug and play and ready to go, and we can just run with it. But I think the reality is, if any form of digital creation, we need to pull in lots of different softwares or different ideas from different areas. And this is also a little bit the way that software is designed. You've got a plug-in here or a bit of this here, or you take one image into another piece of software, which is, we want interoperability. We want to be able to kind of work with lots of different ideas, because you want to push it, right? You don't want to you're not always satisfied with what you've got in front of you. So we're going to cover I think we're going to give quite a lot of names of softwares today, some of which we've used, some of which we haven't. But I think it's really key for us that we're going to sort of like run through what we see as the benefits of those different softwares and where they can be used. And hopefully that will allow listeners to then go off and do their own research as well. But it might give them a starting point to get there.
Yeah. As I think we mentioned a little bit all the way in the beginning, we just want to highlight that we're going to be focusing mostly on fashion and apparel, or the tools that are available, or kind of workflows and examples that we'll be using is mostly related to fashion. Of course, textiles is used in other products as well, like furniture and home textiles and automotive and industrial textiles and all sorts of things. But this is specifically really just focusing on the tools that I think we have encountered when we talk about fashion. And so it's useful to then also kind of break that down, I think, with, what are these components of fashion and how you put together a physical garment, and start really at the physical product.
I think even before you jump into that, we were talking particularly about, we were kind of discussing like why has 3D taken its time to take hold within fashion? Like what's the reason behind that? And we were thinking, because obviously we know that in automotives, you can make a 3D model of a car, and that's been happening for 20 years at this point. Well, there's a couple of reasons. First reason is really expensive to make a sample of a car. No one's just making just a quick knocking off a quick Porsche, that's not happening. Whereas a t-shirt with a print on can be made physically quite quickly. I mean, not quickly in the grand scheme of things. You might wait 3 to 4 weeks for it. You've got a lot of labor involved in it. You've got a lot of time and effort within the people, but down the supply chain, it's considered as quite a simple thing to do. And so fashion has kind of thrived off the fact that it can have this quick turnaround. You can make it yourself. You could get a sample in-house. You could print it if it doesn't look quite right. You could adjust it. So learning a new skill of 3D and then being able to do that quick turnaround is really important for fashion. But it's the learning of the new softwares and making sure they kind of fit in at the right time to be able to do those quick iterations, which is possibly one of the reasons why we think it hasn't taken us hold as quickly as we would have expected by this point, post, like 15 years on from these softwares inceptions, really, I think, at the end of the point. So do you want to break down the digital inputs, because that's kind of where we were starting, I guess?
We thought a little bit about how almost like we structure, because it can be like, if you mentioned a lot of different names and a lot of different tools, like we have to put them, like I think we've done this in some of the other episodes, we talked about these little boxes that we can organize things into. And exactly what you said about, like, you can sample a garment much kind of faster and cheaper than when you can sample a car or a house. And we've seen 3D technology be, it's been used, and it has, it's almost like there's no going back really in a lot of the other industries. But for fashion, it's still relatively new with being able to, like, we have to show the benefits of why we should be using these tools. And the technology is oftentimes quite advanced to digitize materials because they're more fluid and there's more movement in them, for example, than a concrete building and so forth. So we thought a little bit about how do we break down the building, or how do we structure, let's say, since we talk specifically about fashion, the garments and the products in fashion. Most commonly, there's 3, let's say, main inputs or main objects or kind of things that we then keep in mind. And that's the fabric is most part of the garment. We've talked a little bit about fabric digitization in previous episodes, but how you digitize fashion. We're going to go a little bit more into that and talk about some tools. But then aside from just the fabric and digitizing the fabric, you have the trims, like all these different things that maybe go on top of your garment or together with your garment, like zippers and buttons and all sorts of things. And then, of course, also you have the pattern, which is then, like, how do you actually design the individual pieces of the garment before they're then sewn together and then graded in different sizes. And so these are the 3 main items: the trims, the materials, and the patterns. And should we just talk about materials first and then digital capture and recap some of that?
So we can speak to some of these capture methods. So for example, we know actually we use Visu, so for one of our material capture options. So that's obviously, it's a scanning piece of software. And then we'll talk about the processing in a minute. There's obviously Bandicoot, which I'm also about to use Bandicoot in my fellowship, which is very exciting. Maybe I can talk about that a little later on. So Bandicoot for material capture. We've got Frontier, which I've used a little bit, which is using a flatbed scanner, let's say, into Frontier, and some processing around that. SETI Textura, can you talk to at all, Jorgen?
Yes, in my understanding, I haven't actually used Textura myself, but it's a bit similar. I think my understanding is that it's based off of a flatbed scanner, so that the main
Mm,
input then is you put your material into flatbed scanner. I think this is similar for Frontier,
mm,
and then you scan this the way that you do with the flatbed scanner, the textile itself, and then that image that you then bring into the software on, let's say, Frontier's and Seti Textura's side is essentially a reference image, so that they
mm.
have lots of materials that have been digitized previously in a database or kind of structured on their end, and then they will reference and then use AI. I think is my
Mm,
understanding, and not entirely sure in detail how that works out, but this is my understanding of the basic technology, that
yeah.
you kind of have this reference image from a flatbed scanner, and then you reference a data set, and then it synthesizes or kind of generates a texture file, and the texture maps based on that reference and input that you've given to it.
But that's something quite different from Bandicoot, where you're capturing, up to 25 different images, right? And then it's being compiled.
Yeah, so Visu and Bandicoot falls more into this kind of direct capture space, where you actually use then a camera and you have lights from lots of different angles. So for example, with a Visu, you have the camera fixed on a box and you have the lights inside the box. And then for
Mm,
every image that's taken, then the lights then shift from different kind of angles or directions within the box. And Bandicoot essentially has a flash mounted on top of the camera. And then
mm,
as the flash is then, as you kind of trigger the image, the flash is sends out a beam of light that hits the material reflects that light, and then the camera will capture exactly how the material responded or like reflected and sent back that
yeah.
light. So it's kind of two different like that. We call it almost like you can think of Frontier and SETI and some of these flatbed solutions as more falling into the category of approximation, or like where you're
Hmm.
sending a reference image in, and then you're generating or synthesizing the texture map based on that reference image. And then you have Visu and Bandicoot and TG3D, this new Nuno device. We haven't actually, I don't think either one of us used it, but our understanding is also that it's similar to let's say a Visu, where you have a camera on top of a box and then different
Yeah.
lights within that box. So this is kind of
Yeah.
different tools. All the different names that we've mentioned are different tools falling into these two
Yeah.
main buckets of almost then direct capture and approximation. So just depending on what your needs are, I would say, more than anything.
And also, no doubt, there's definitely other options being developed currently by
Yeah.
different, a lot of the software companies that we work with, they're obviously, everyone's looking into different ways that we can do it. I had a meeting with someone the other day who is looking to get it with working with the iPhone, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think very much the way I'm coming from this, I've been working in this space now for 3 years, is let's see what new technologies are going to come forward for us. But what
Yeah.
we do right now is we have quite a wide way, quite a couple of different ways for doing material capture that are really robust. They work really well. There is nothing stopping you from starting that right now,
Yeah.
tomorrow. I mean, on
Yeah.
a basic level, if you want like something easy and quick to go with, that's what you can do, depending on barriers to entry with cost and usage and training teams. But you can start tomorrow doing digital material capture. Like, don't let people tell you that you can't. it's definitely possible.
There's an option for everyone out there, whether you have lots of money to spend on machinery, or whether you want to get started, or you have a flatbed scanner and you want to use that. And
Yeah.
even something we didn't even mention is that most of the companies we mentioned also offer a service where you can send the materials to the company,
Yeah.
and then they can digitize and take care of the entire thing for you. So really, just depending on what scale and what you're looking for, have a look at some of these companies and ask us questions if you want to know more.
Yeah.
And I think we know most of the people behind these or these technologies and within these
We
companies.
can point you in the right
we'll be
direction.
happy to kind of share the contacts there. But so then what happens next? Once you've then captured your material, what do we do then?
We have to process that material, because what we've got is
Yeah.
some really beautiful images of really gorgeous material, but maybe
Yeah.
it's not in repeat, or you've got whenever we do material capture, we prepare the materials really, really thoroughly. Stray fibers, fiber migration, creases, we get rid of all of those kind of things. But you then have to tile it out in some way that is going to be understandable for whatever software you take it into. And so that's when we start processing the material. And we might do that in a number of different systems, actually. I'm going to speak to a few right now. So we will do processing actually in Bandicoot system with the tile generator. which is really easy to use. That works really well for us. We also will do processing in 3D Magic, which is part of DMIX. And so the processing, essentially, it's repeats and getting the maps to look really good, and then removing any anomalies on the material. So you have to keep the textile looking natural. So it has to have those natural inconsistencies, because if you just strip all of them out, we know it looks fake. Your brain looks at it and goes, this material doesn't look correct. It looks too fake. So we have to keep those natural inconsistencies. We have to have a really good repeat without it repeating across the material, because then you'll get like banding or the striae effects. And again, your brain just goes, you can see it. You can see it on a computer screen immediately, and you immediately shut down and go, that's not correct. That's not real. I know I'm not looking at something correct. And then it's making sure the maps are working in the way that they need to work. So for example, the alpha map, which is the transparency, quite often we'll have to work on that, make sure the transparency really is the material as transparent as it's being shown in the 3D software, all of those kind of ideas. So we also work with, we'll take the material into Blender and have a look at it. We might not do processing in Blender, but we might do quality control in Blender. So we'll take that material into Blender and lay it in a scene with different sets of lighting. And then we look at that material from different angles, different sets of lighting, to see if that material performs, I guess, the way we're expecting it to perform in 3D. So we'll do that in Blender. We also look at substance. So substance is more where we might actually take the individual map files and play with them and post-process them a little bit into substance. I'm not a heavy substance user. And there are people who are much better than me. That sounds really bad. I'm not a heavy substance user.
Heavy substance user.
Really bad. I've said that too many times. But I don't use substance that much. So we use it for certain projects, and it's almost like its own beast a little bit, substance. And I'm going to talk completely freely, is that at the very beginning, when I started my digital material journey, I was like, oh, procedural textual generation and substance, that's not a real textiles. I don't believe that it looks correct. I've completely changed my view on that. I think that I've completely changed my view on it. Like, as a textile person, I was like, there's no way you can just make it from the pixels up. But I now do believe that you can, if you have the skill level. So I'm ready to eat my words on that one.
And maybe to highlight that, because to me, like, we can talk more about procedural textile generation, which essentially almost like, when we say procedural, we really just mean how, materials are broken out, like built up, more like bottom up. So to think of the way that physical textiles are made, that you have fiber spun into yarn and then woven or knitted into the fabric. Like, this is kind of like a procedural, like you go step by step. And the same thing happens in the digital textile or texture generation process as well, is that you can actually use software like Adobe Substance, and then you can build up a material pixel by pixel, or kind of lay effects and rebuild it up in a way that doesn't have to do, like, it doesn't need to have any connection to the real physical world around us. Like, even you could build materials made out of fire and water and all this, but of course mainly here talking about physical fabrics, and those tools have come a very long way. But you do sometimes, very often, also need to have some technical skills. Like, it takes maybe more time to build them up in the correct way and to get them actually to look realistic. So that can be maybe a little bit of a downside of that. But these tools are developing quickly.
They are, and I've been talking with a few different companies who are building from the yarn up with yarn properties. So you input the yarn properties, the physical properties of that yarn, and then it will weave or knit the material representing those yarn properties, all in 3D. It will move, it will drape the way that yarn would move and drape. Your Z twist, your S twist, everything is considered within that procedural textile generation, which I'm really interested to see where that's going to go. But I think if we're going to talk about digital material creation, there's a few softwares which I'm really familiar with from just textile CAD design, like original CAD design, right? Pointcaré, Penelope, Scott Weave. It's pixel based, and it's creating it a flat image. And then when those softwares start working in 3D, that's when it becomes obviously really interesting around procedural textile generation. Apex Fizz just from
Yeah.
Sumishaiki. I personally don't use. I've had demos of it. It looks amazing. It gets very, very good user reviews. But again, you have to be quite specialized within the knit world to be using Apex Fizz. So.
Yeah, I thought it could be a good example in terms of maybe just to explain if someone doesn't, just to give an example of, when we talk about procedural texture generation, some of these things, I find Apex Fizz, I haven't, like, I don't know how to use it myself very well, but I've seen it used many times and I've had demos, like you say, as well. And what I find to be a good example with Apex Fizz is also that Shimaseki has these knitting machines, and so that you can create, like, you can digitize the yarn and you can bring that like the digitized yarn specifications into your Apex Fizz software. You can then, let's say, knit virtually a fabric within your Apex Fizz software, so you can set what kind of construction you want to your knit and so forth, and just how you want things built up, or how you want to build up your fabric. And then you can even use that same process and everything you've done so far to then program the actual knitting machine, and then have even the fabric, or even sometimes full knit garments, come out of the knitting machine on the other side. So this is just one of these cool examples of how, if you do all the groundwork and build materials up from scratch, and you have all the programming of how the materials are made, then you can also use that to program the machines. It's probably not as kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 step as simple as what I just said. There's a lot of technical know-how to all this. So that's like the thing that often gets in the way, but it's a great example of how you can go from just building something up from scratch, or bottom up, and then get it into an actual physical knitted garment all the way at the end.
Yeah, which I think works really well for fully fashioned knitwear, because that's how it also, obviously, how it's being built, which actually takes us really nicely into the digital product assembly. So we've touched on the way you could capture your materials. So you've got flatbed scanning, you've got photography-based direct capture systems. You could create it from scratch in a software program, a textile design software program. But then you've got then is a digital material. You don't have a garment. You've got to then build it into a garment, right? So that's kind of like your next step. You have to bring your patterns in, usually on DXF file format, and bring your patterns into some form of digital product assembly software, which listeners would know as, I'm just going to list a few, like CLO, Browzwear V-Stitcher, Optitext, Style 3D, SEDI Author, because we've got the digital material, but we then have to bring it into and make a garment from that. We need the pattern, and then we also need the trims as well. And all of those things together will then allow you to make your actual digital product garment.
This is where it all kind of virtually stitches together or comes in, and I guess that's also
very good.
where the trims, like we talked a lot about fabric, as you said, and digitizing fabric, different approaches to that, but we didn't, for example, like also just to briefly mention trims, because this is quite important also when you come into the digital product assembly. You have your pattern files, you mentioned very often in a DXF file format. So this is just like an extension, so you can see on your computer, this is the file format that patterns are often digitized in. You then bring that into, let's just say, CLO 3D as an example, and then you lay out your pattern pieces, and then you then select what material you would like to have on each pattern piece. And then you can also bring in, for example, trims. And trims can be, I think, tricky to digitize. There's a lot of people working with trim digitization, and I can't say that I'm a specialist in this at all myself, but I've encountered, I think, a little bit of trim digitization, where oftentimes the trims are, you can't just digitize them as a material, because the material is digitized more almost like two-dimensionally, or like is more flat, and then you generate texture maps that really give the material this ability to almost simulate the way that it looks and behaves in the software. But trims can often be almost like a button. You have to create a 3D version of that button, and it's harder sometimes to just scan it or simply create a 3D button. And so you might have to build it yourself in again, different types of 3D software, where you then build a button and build a zipper and build this out. You had any experience with exactly how you do?
So quite often you'll basically just be sculpting it in 3D. So you'll make it'll be an object, an OBJ file, made in Blender, created, for example, on our side, made in Blender, where you'll create a 3D button, a zip head, something along those lines. So any hard trims, really. So if you think about those hard trims in real life, those hard trims are also 3D sculpted. If it's a soft trim, for example, a back neck label, a flag label, a care label, we'll usually just make the piece of material and then we'll do the print on top or do the embroidery on top. And you can do that directly in the software. You can do that. I'll use my examples. You can do that in CLO, you can do that in V-Stitcher, or you can scan the actual label and then essentially sort of like mask it, cut it out and bring it in. So soft trims you can create in the 3D softwares like CLO and Browzwear, V-Stitcher, whereas hard trims you have to sculpt outside of it and bring those in. And then you can apply your finishes to them, whatever they might be. Because obviously, and then what you might find with your trim suppliers, and I would always ask, is do you have 3D models of your trims that you're delivering? Because some trim suppliers deliver those directly into CLO already. So YKK, for example, have got, the trim set in CLO, and a lot of trim suppliers are modeling in 3D already. So if I would say, always ask the question just in case, because they just might not have told you. So
it's a good example even of how, we've talked a bit before about how we see a potential future where fabric mills digitize their fabrics at the mill. So as they're manufacturing, or let's say weaving a new fabric and it's coming out the other end of the factory, then they could digitize that fabric immediately, and then they'd have a digital version that they can then send off, for use in 3D design tools. And this is the same thing we've already seen happening in trims. Like, it's even almost, I can't say it's necessarily more common, but it's definitely quite common, I would say, for trim suppliers to be able to offer
simply
3D
because the trims,
more and more.
you need the object file to be able to make the file, to be able to make the mold anyway. So it exists as a way of working already. Whereas within material digitization, a textile mill doesn't have to have the digital material right at the moment, right? Because it's not being, the demand is not right there. The demand's happening at manufacturer level, garment manufacturer level, or brand level. So we're just waiting for it to kind of go down the supply chain. We work with quite a few mills, but it's not common like right now, right? It's more that it's happening at garment manufacturer level or brand level. So once you've done
no, I was just going to say, even, as you talked about before with the digital product assembly, like that, I think that really brings together all the pieces with, you got your trims, you got your material, you got your patterns, and then you're assembling all this together into the 3D design software. I think that was what you were about to say with CLO and Browzwear and these tools.
It really is a case of, once you've made your 3D garment, what are you optimizing it for? Is this 3D garment being used for design and development? So are you essentially replicating your design and development process in 3D, or making your design and development process more efficient in 3D? Or is that 3D garment going further? And we'll talk about that in a second, into an animation pipeline. So the way that we often work with our customers is that we provide the digital material, they make the digital, then the customer makes the digital garment, and then that digital garment gets placed into a digital showroom. And that digital showroom becomes the place where the buyers and the selectors and the designers go to view their ranges that they've created, and then they decide what they're going to go to a pre-production sample on, right? So is that what what are you optimizing your 3D sample for? Is it for design and development? Is it going into a fit show? Is it going into a room for fit, for example? Or is it going into an e-com area? So if we talk about mock shops and showrooms, that's a space where you have to take your digital garment, because once you make a 3D garment, if it's sat in a piece in your 3D software, it's not really any use to anyone until it's with its friends, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's I think this almost like this element of almost just thinking about what you want to do all the way from the beginning is now we're coming to this part of our discussion where we're now talking about having an assembled digital product, but if you don't really do anything to it at this point, it's just going to be then stuck in some storage or some digital asset management software, or you're going to have this nice garment, but it's not necessarily used for anything. And so now you're at that point where you probably should have thought about already before you got there, now actually what you wanted to do with the garment. But it's really important that you at least now decide what you want to do with it, so that you can then think about, like, what do we do with it next? And that could be, rendering out social media or marketing content for e-commerce, and, photorealistic images is one way to go. You could almost go to manufacturing and create a tech pack, and then send, your 3D models off as references, and really use it to support and make sure that they're manufacturing the right thing and the right fits and everything. You could use it for animation, and almost just, that's a whole world of its own, and on what then wanting to bring something into animation and even game design. There are tools like Unreal Engine that are used for a lot of game design. I think especially, this is not something we talk so much about, but almost like this whole metaverse. I think Unreal Engine has been very popular on building out different metaverse applications, and so you have to really think about just what do you want to do with it next. So that's kind of this stage we're at.
I can kind of give like 3 direct examples of like how customers are using the digital garments that they're making. So we've got one customer, I won't mention any names, but I'm just going to give examples. But we've got one customer that's specifically using their 3D samples in a mock showroom, which is used internally for design and development, for selecting their range plans. What we'd understand as those flat range plans that we had. You rack up in a room all your garments physically, you select which ones you're going to buy, and you say 10,000 of those, 5,000 of those. They're doing that with 3D garments in a digital showroom, right? That's one confirmed way that people are working with the digital products that we make. They've got another customer who we worked with who basically did e-com shots with our digital materials. So they put them onto the garments and rendered them onto live models. So it was a digital garment rendered onto a live model for an e-com shot, which was really, really interesting. So that was a piece of work we did as well. And then I have another customer, actually it's a collaboration rather than a customer, who I worked with, who is doing work in the metaverse, where we provided the digital materials for them to make the 3D garments for digital only garments in the metaverse. So just from our like standing start of our business of creating digital materials and digital garments, we've got 3 completely different use cases of how those are being used. So I think it reiterates, you might be on your digital product creation journey, and again, it's saying the same thing. It's start with the end in mind. What are you aiming to do with that 3D garment? That's exactly it. Where's it going, and what's the use of it to you? And then you can get your workflow going backwards from that, and build it from the ground up.
As you were talking about that too, like for me, I think what really got me excited about a lot of this, just 3D in general, and opened my eyes to a lot of this, if all the way from the beginning, was also these new business models that are also coming out of this. Like you've mentioned a few things, even just dressing up models virtually or digitally for e-commerce. But I think, just to give an example also of maybe something that's not being done so much right now, but something we might see a lot more of in the future, could also be that you can, as a designer, you digitize your materials, or you work with digital materials, you work with digital trims, and you work with digital patterns, and you bring it all together and you get this digital garment made up. You could now potentially also render that out in photoreal, real quality of the image itself. As you said, even like you could dress it up on models, you can make it look like a person is actually wearing that garment, and you can put that up in an e-commerce store. And if you combine that with a crowdfunding or this kind of, Kickstarter or crowdsourcing models, you could now, for example, test the market and see whether there's interest and demand in the market for these things even before you go to manufacturing. Maybe simultaneously you could use the same 3D material that you've used in this process to also send it to a manufacturer, make sure that the tech packs are actually, let's say, manufacturable, or that you can actually create these products physically if there is demand for it. And then while you then have them out there in the market and people are looking at them, whether that's social media or e-commerce where people can buy them or like pre-order, you can then say that if we can, get enough orders, if we can get 500 people to buy this before we're going to go ahead and start the production, then everyone gets a little bit of a discount, and then you make sure that you only manufacture what's already solved. And so this also opens up for a whole new business model, which is just not something we see a lot of just now, but I think where there's a lot of potential in the future for brands, and maybe you're a smaller designer or a smaller brand and you cannot afford to have so many items and SKUs in stock or in inventory, then this could be a way for you to get started before you actually have to stock up a lot of inventory, and you can just get things manufactured as needed.
Yeah, completely. I completely agree with you. And toiling in 3D and designing your patterns in 3D. I've been working with a group of young designers aged between the age of 18 to 26 with the V&A. So they did a month-long course, and they all came out saying we can now design and iterate in 3D because we can't afford to buy the materials just to sample. It's beyond what they could financially achieve, but now they can design in 3D, and then when they're comfortable with their design, then they can go into their production, which might be a production of one at this point, right? Because they're young, new and emerging designers, which is really interesting. The last thing I wanted to mention, which I'm weirdly passionate about, which is about data security and asset management. And I'm sure I shouldn't be this excited or about this, but working within this space and working within digital product creation, it's a reminder to everyone out there that asset management is going to be one of your biggest tasks, because as you create the trims, the materials, the patterns as digital files, and those 3 different things have to be sent to different suppliers, or they're sent to different people to work on. It's how you kind of keep track of those assets. So a really good asset management system will be your best friend. A very, very good naming convention will also be your best friend. Don't let designers name anything for you, because it will just be called final, the real final. This is the actual final. So naming conventions in a digital asset management system combined with decent security for your storage of your files, that's what also needs to be considered. So the IT systems, whether that's your friend or your IT team in your company, has to be involved in all of this, because you will generate multitudes of files before you know it when you're doing this, when you're starting on this journey. And it's just something that I want to kind of like put out there. Asset management, it's the new fun thing.
Yeah, but we're talking about software, so I think this is really relevant. Like when we talk about creating assets and we talk about all the software where the assets are used, something that's very easy to oversee, and I think something that often only comes with a bit of experience. Even like you mentioned with the design, almost like meme, the classic design meme of like final, the naming convention. So, or not having a naming convention, it's just really important, I think. And as you work in larger teams and as you gain more and more experience, having folder structures or having a system and a software itself just to manage your assets. There's different things that you can explore out there. I think DMIX have something like this, and Swatchbook have something similar.
Full disclosure, we use DMIX and have a partnership with them, but Swatchbook also as well, and Ventana as well, and I'm sure there's numerous others which people will use or know about, and also a lot of the PLM systems are getting in on the action as well. But one thing I would say, and this is speaking as a designer who's working in this space, is a digital asset management system with a visual side to it is really important. Being able to see your assets as well as filter them, essentially, like filter them by name, but actually being able to see them. If you're working across teams, if you're working with designers, if you're working with buyers and merchandisers, a visual element, not just a data element, is really, really important. And that's just for the designers out there. That's my I think even just to mention an example there of just, I think how one company, I haven't used this so much myself, but I've seen a demo of how Swatchbook has built this this new application of how you can mix and match. Like you can, for example, take a 3D model with different constructed of different pattern elements, and then you can then take materials from your library, and then you can mix and match, and you can see how that would look like in all of these different variations where you draw in your materials and your trims and also different things, and then you make different combinations. And this is just like even an extension of the visualization. Like you can both see
each element or each asset visualized in that tool, but you can also start to combine them in different ways and explore, and having that kind of creativity input can be quite important. And there's tools out there that can do that too. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, I always find the unlimited, like, you know, throw everything in and get like 10 or 20 versions from it. I always find it quite disconcerting. Like we used to do it a lot at Point Carré, actually. I'd be like, you put in 10 colors and it'd be like, make 40 variations. As a designer, I was always like, oh,
get a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's still elements of it that are really helpful. And also being able to see, it sounds really basic, but being able to see your assets. You'd be surprised how many digital asset management systems you can't actually see the assets, which sounds
that's a good point.
Like see them in a really in a high quality way. That's what's really important, essentially, at the end of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of.
I think we talked through,
right?
Yeah, kind of most. I don't even know. I think we've summarized already quite a bit along the way, but I think, you know, through the conversation we've just had, we've tried to outline, you know, the creation of these different elements or assets, different tools that you can use. You're going to need more than one tool, that you can probably kind of pick up from the conversations we've had. There's not going to be just one tool that does it all equally well. So have a think about what are you creating? Are you creating footwear or furniture or fashion? Or now we've used a lot of examples from more, you know, fashion focused, but even a lot of these tools that we've talked about can be used for lots of other things than just fashion products. So try to have, you know, like explore a little bit what tools are out there, and just kind of try. I think that's the main key, is just like try to get started and learn even just one tool. A lot of these tools, you can see which ones are the most kind of popular ones you can get started with, and you can try and you can explore and figure out, you know, what are the pros and cons of each tool from there.
We've also, and I don't know if we're going to release it because we're still trying to build on it, but we've got a board together of companies that we've talked about and mentioned, which I think we will be releasing, if not after this episode, then definitely after the next, within season 1, after the next episode, which we're hoping might be a good space for people to come. And again, this is our combined knowledge of all the different software. Oh, by the way, the plural of software is also software, just to say. All the different software out there. So I think maybe we might release the Notion board soon, which I think will be helpful for people to look at as well.
Yeah. I think, you know, based on what we talked about also today, we've mentioned these software, but there's many more out there. So when there's resource that we're just trying to make a list and make a Notion board that has lots of different software in there, then you can click. There's going to be some links to the website. We're not going to try to take anyone's side and tell you which one to choose. Like you can talk to us, of course, and it's, you know, connect on LinkedIn and so forth and ask us questions. Feel free to, you know, come to us with whatever you're facing, but also feel free to add to that list and send, you know, more other software that we might have not found and we can add to it. So we're hoping that could just be a list, like a solid list that's going to come out in the next few weeks, I would say.
Yes.
We're building it out as we speak.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think next episode towards end of April.
Towards the end of April, we're going to come back to, we're still planning out how we have 6 episodes in this first season. So we're going to be releasing a bit more about how we're going to have these last 2 episodes. This was episode 4. We're going to have 2 episodes left, and then we're going to start planning from there what even more we can do with this. So we'll come back to the 5th episode at the end of the month.
Brilliant. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jorgen. It's been fun.
It's been very fun. Thank you for anyone that has been listening. We'll see you again in a few weeks, and feel free to connect with us in the meantime. Thank you for listening to The Seamless Blend. If you enjoyed today's discussion, feel free to subscribe. We also invite you to connect with us and participate in our discussions on Discord. Let us know if you agree, disagree, or have any questions. Until next time, take care.